man is a quotation from all his ancestors. Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Words matter. And anyone that's paid any attention to me will be completely unshocked by that sentence. This is intentional and purposeful, as saying what I mean to me is the foundation of my integrity. Therefore, it becomes imperative to use the words that mean the things I intend to convey when I speak. This is the first in a series of videos I plan on doing over the next few months to highlight specific words that are being perverted in common usage. Words like privilege. Privilege is what we're going to speak about today. The word, how it's used, why it's being used as a pejorative, and what it really does convey. Privilege to me is the outcome of an effort, one which is then passed on to generations beyond. It's an inheritance to a future generation. Things like liberalism, as it was in the West when the Enlightenment happened, was the privilege passed on by those Enlightenment figures to generations beyond it. So you could call that Enlightenment privilege or liberal privilege, if you will. Another one that's quite common in usage today is male privilege. So that could be conveyed as our parents, those of us that are male, their genes that combined to create this male, that was an act that happened. The privilege that may or may not exist by that act happening was not unearned. It was not stolen. It was not invalid because there was a biological act that occurred that created that maleness. You may feel like hierarchy as biology defines it is bad, but you can't simply say something is unearned or invalid because it doesn't fit your worldview. Too many times, the word privilege is used interchangeably with unfair or disagree or invalid or unearned, and it is simply disingenuous to use it this way, as that's just not what it means. To intone that my ancestors' work and effort and biological selection and earnings and warfare and innovation and everything else that made up who they were to get my lineage and ancestry to this exact point, to somehow say that because I didn't do all of those things, that whatever I may have lacks validity or is unearned is bullshit. Everything that we do as a biological species is, in the grand scheme of things, to progress or enhance or advantage our offspring, right? The specimens that happen down the line, our ancestors, right? Our future generations. So the things we do is to advantage them. We are selective as a social species. So yes, it naturally would occur that I am going to do everything I can to help specifically my kids and anyone and only those that would then interact and advantage my kids, right? That is called being a good parent. Now, what is it that folks that would use the word privilege to talk down the actions of others, what are they trying to say? Well, they're trying to say that everything that was earned in the past that may advantage you or yours now is unearned. It's bad, right? So their assertion is that if all things being equal, there was no inherited advantage, that everyone would be effectively the same, right? It is the magic ingredient to equality that seems to be missing by any scientific measure. So if you were to remove all financial or parental advantages, meaning having two parents versus one, if you were to remove that from the equation, everyone would have equal access and equal ability within society. And this is proven out time and time again to be false. It really does go against some core tenets of selective biology, right? So what would have to happen in this instance for these things to be true would mean that two parents that select each other to procreate aren't selecting advantaged or superior, if you want to use that word, or fitter, right? So genes that are more fit for the current environment, that those don't matter, that those are false choices, that those don't actually mean anything. And this is simply false, right? So, again, it's provable, if you have two athletes that make a child, that child will be athletic. If you have two tall parents, all things being equal, they will create a tall child. If you have two intelligent parents, all things being equal, they will create an intelligent child. And the negatives all occur there as well. Now, there may be some things in the past that, according to some moral standards of today, are unacceptable, meaning, folks bring up things like colonialism or slavery or things like that. But at the end of the day, everyone's ancestors that are alive today subjugated or invaded or dominated another human being at some point down the line, because it's the only reason why they have survived linearly until this point, right? Every species that exists, the specimens of that species that exist today, have outperformed and dominated the lineages that they have replaced, the lineages that don't exist anymore. The difference today is that humans have what we perceive to be, and this will be another video, the free will and agency to somehow successfully choose to live outside of our biological constraints. And there are no cases where a species that stops acting like the species that it is and is put in constraints which would have it behave in a different way, where that species exists, thrives, and even survives. That goes into the behavioral sync things that I will talk about at some point on this channel. But going back to, why privilege is a dirty word, right? At the end of the day, there has to be some reason or excuse or, cosmic constant, if you will, for behavioral studies that explains why some folks are more capable in some means and some folks aren't. And, critical race theory and other things would have us believe that only because of negative interferences in the past do negative differences exist in the present. Now, the real problem is that those folks look at that as a balance sheet, right? One that today or tomorrow needs to be balanced out, not simply by magically bringing some folks up, but by punishing and bringing other folks down. And ultimately, the only way to balance out a debt is not by, creating some credit. It's by creating a debit. It's by reducing something, not by increasing something else. The only way to fix tall privilege isn't to give everybody a stool. It's to hack all the tall people off at the knees. And that is ultimately why allowing the language, allowing the word, right, privilege, to become this pejorative that needs to be fixed or punished or removed will ultimately cause more problems than not, because the only way to fix an advantage is with an equal and opposite disadvantage, and that just won't work. Ultimately, why it won't work comes down to the fact that we cannot ignore that we are a species. We cannot ignore the health and the growth of the species by measuring it against those that are on the bottom end of the curve of the species. That is how species end up going extinct. And that is why I am an elitist at my core. Anyways, I'd love to hear everybody else's thoughts, so leave a comment below, like or dislike as you see fit, subscribe if you're not, and I will see you next time. Peace!